Welcome to our State of Cyber series. And in this particular segment of our State of Cyber series, we have a section called We Are One. It is around our campaign to raise awareness around cybersecurity, in particular, letting people know that we're always connected in cyberspace. And in this particular series, we have an absolutely critical element that we're going to talk about, which is human trafficking. And the title of this segment is What About Us? A Youth Centered Approach Toward Combating Human Trafficking in Cyberspace. And to assist us this morning in being able to share such an important topic with you, we have the CEO of Protect Us Kids Foundation. We have Ms. Vita Woods. So, good morning, Vita.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
And I wanted to just give you all a little bit of background. You get to read the quote to get an idea of the type of person she is. I just absolutely adore the work that she's doing and what she's bringing to our community. So in terms of her background, she formerly served as a U.S. political appointment from 2009 until 2015 as the Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy CIO. Ms. Woods was strategic leadership spans over approximately 22 years and focuses on cybersecurity policies and decision-making processes that protect and respect the human rights by design. She's also currently a cybersecurity executive at a leading global financial services firm, where she is accountable for cybersecurity threat oversight and support of ensuring transparent, consistent, and comprehensive program for managing operational risk across the firm globally. Ms. Woods Ms. Woods has received numerous awards for her contributions towards secure technology, innovation, and maintains a passionate commitment to continuously supporting women and minorities in STEM and STEAM. And because of her personal testimony of overcoming adversity from humble beginnings growing up in one of the most volatile inner cities of Chicago and navigating non-inclusive environments throughout her career, Vita's life purpose is to pay it forward in doing what she deeply understands as being God's works. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Woods to share with you what you can do, a little bit about Protect Us Kids Foundation and what you can do to protect our young people. Thank you and welcome, Vita.
Thank you so much, Danietta, for an awesome introduction. Thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. As Danietta stated, I'm the founder of Protect Us Kids Foundation. As we proceed, I understand, it's everyone's morning for work and coffee. So we're going to get through these slides at a rather steady pace. Next slide, please. Next slide. So our current webinar topics for today will basically focus on an introduction to our organization. We'll talk a little bit about the challenge that we're trying to solve, as well as online child sexual exploitation and grooming, and an overview of our program of services. At the end, I'll have a few resources that you can actually reference as well. Next slide. So who are we? Who is Protect Us Kids Foundation? Well, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in the U.S., and we're focused on protecting at-risk youth from globally cyber-related crimes so they can navigate the internet without falling prey to people who may take advantage of them. Our overall goal, however, is to protect all youth. However, we have a very specialized interest in those youth that are residing within underserved, rural, and marginalized areas who may be more vulnerable to predatory maneuvers. Next slide. What we do. So how we accomplish our mission overall is to first and foremost focus on providing awareness to young people. We focus very much on understanding that our youth are the ones who drive the mission. They understand more so than anyone how they interact online, their circumstances, how they communicate, as well as some of the challenges that they experience. So the majority of our programming is really driven by the youth within our Youth Life program, and I'll talk about that a little later in the slide. We also work with other organizations, NGOs, and others to stimulate the development of technology-driven safety solutions. And as you can see today, through strategic partnerships, like our partnership with Covenant Security Solutions, we identify key technological and human indicators that can lead to exploitation. Next slide. So our overall mission and our alignment is focused directly aligned to United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goal, which is 16.2. That focuses on ending abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence and torture against children. We have a presence with the UN, a variety of organizations, and we have a grassroots presence in Nigeria, Bangladesh, Nepal, as well as here within the U.S., within Southwest of U.S., specifically Arizona. And we also, of course, are focused primarily on those inner cities, rural areas within the U.S. and globally as well. Next slide, please. So why are we focusing on cyber awareness? Well, primarily the biggest reason, and most of you are familiar with this, is really to help minimize the potential risk and to prevent our children from becoming victims. We have found that although young people are on the internet and they feel that they understand how to navigate it adeptly, they really need to be educated on how to conduct themselves online, just like they need to be educated how to conduct themselves within face-to-face interactions. Our children need to be able to respond appropriately to the various situations that occur online, especially as it pertains to the type of conversations, the content, from everything from cyberbullying to sexual solicitation. Also, we find that parents and those in adults that are responsible for youth in particular, they need to understand the varying threats and risks associated with internet use in order to help protect the children. Next slide. So our work overall is really focused on partnerships, right? So we like to look at ourselves as a conduit with other strategic partners. We focus primarily on researching behavioral and social aspects involved with online enticement of youth for sexual acts by sexual offenders and or predators. And we have a three-pillared approach. Our first approach is to really establish partnerships with mental and behavioral health. We understand this cyber in general is a human issue. And because of that, it's important for us to work very closely with mental and behavioral health organizations. Also because the youth that are impacted by online child sexual exploitation or online commercial sex trafficking, more often than not, quite a few of them are already going through social services and systems within their community. And that can also involve NGOs as well. And we also focus on mental and behavioral health because all of our awareness that we provide and our resources and tools are tailored to the communities that we serve. And that's very important for us to make sure that we have the appropriate representation, that we're sensitive to the cultural norms of the community that we serve, and also ensuring that as we provide our resources and tools to young people, that it will be impactful for them and they can relate to the information that we're attempting to provide. A second pillar of our approach is focused with academia. And so we have a concerted effort to seek out universities and other academic institutions to serve as potentially their client for their capstone projects. The goal is to work with the graduate school population, provide subject matter expertise from our volunteers within our organization on online child sexual exploitation and cyber in general, and also to help the academic institutions enhance their curriculum. In doing so, we strive to ensure that the students, one, obtain college credit. They have an opportunity to really work in a fascinating arena of cyber, but with a unique twist in that it also involves the social impacts involved with cyber as well. On the other hand, we receive validated research and statistical information that we can place on our website. We understand right now the current state there's very little information in regards to really concrete validated data, almost non-existent for the demographic that we serve. So it very much is a win-win for the academic institutions as well as for Protect Us Kids. Our third pillar is what you see here as an example is our partnerships with other technology-focused organizations, other NGOs, as well as with federal and local and state and global law enforcement entities. And that's important because what you don't necessarily see on the front end of our organization is that we work very closely with these organizations, because through our work with mental and behavioral health, we're also able to identify some very unique key indicators that we can share with our partners so that they can actually have a different lens in respect to the services that they're trying to provide in protecting children online as well. Next slide, please. Our target audiences, really, you'll see an asterisk by youth. So the age group that we really focus on is from 3 years to 17 years. We also have 18 to 21 because quite a few of the youth that are impacted by online child sexual exploitation and or commercial online sex trafficking, they tend to more often than not, if their images, any type of explicit material is out online, they tend to age out, right? And so most often than not, they are young, and as they progress in life, it doesn't necessarily mean that the images go away. And so it's very important for us to focus on youth within a very, very broad scale. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like later in the presentation. We also focused on guardians, parents, foster parents, grandparents, anyone that has any type of awareness or concern with protecting children online. We want to make sure that we provide them the adequate knowledge as well as identify the threats that exist in cyberspace. And that's important, right? Because we can't do this alone. And the most effective measurement that we've seen thus far in terms of fighting this fight is in understanding that it really is based on the human factor of establishing relationships with young people and talking with them and engaging with them and understanding some of their concerns. Again, I mentioned academic institutions, our health and social services, sexual assault advocacy and outreach organizations, and again, our strategic partnerships with corporations, NGOs, and our international governments. Next slide, please. So we talk about the challenge. Next slide. What exactly are we trying to serve or trying to solve rather? Our basic fundamental question for Protect Us Kids Foundation is really trying to answer the question is, how does online commercial sex trafficking actually impact youth globally within rural, underserved, and marginalized populations? That is a key question that we are attempting to ask. But in asking that question, it's very interesting. It's sort of peeling the onion in regards to the problem. The problem is very complex. There's a manner of interdependencies that are involved. We ask similar questions and other considerations as to what are the key risk indicators of this particular demographic and how do they vary by geographical region. An example, child brides, for example. What is the prevalence of young people that are impacted as child brides? Is technology used? And if so, how is that technology used in order to help support this type of nefarious activity online? Another aspect that we look at is what exactly are specific key risk indicators within tribal and primitive populations. An example, you can look at perhaps South Sudan as an example of this. We have noted information in regards to young people and youth in particular. There's an assumption that these particular demographic does not necessarily have the technology They may not have the most advanced technology, but they do have access to cell phones. And that seems to be something that's prevalent irrespective of where individuals are. If they don't have access to cell phones, they're interacting with others who do have access to such technology. And it's a mean of communication. So wherever that communication is being facilitated, for example, within the tribal primitive populations, we're finding that there are youth within these specific demographic that are ending up in places that are of question. For example, in Asia, Philippines, they're also ending up in Middle East, in Dubai. And so there's definitely a pathway, and technology is being used to communicate, whether that's to move people in particular, but with the young people, we're very interested in understanding what that is. Another thing is focusing on the mental and behavioral risk factors for youth within this demographic and their susceptibility to become victims of online child sexual exploitation. And again, understanding and really doing research on how we can leverage innovative technology to help us identify underlying connections to other forms of transnational organized crime. Next slide, please. And what is human trafficking? So for most of you who are on this webinar, or if you're viewing this webinar, you've received so much information about human trafficking, and there's a lot of awareness around it. But Protect Us Kids really aligns to the United Nations definition for human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means, such as force, abduction, fraud, or coercion for an improper purpose, including forced labor or sexual exploitation. We understand that traffickers have a variety of different methods, and technology is something, especially online, that they leverage to the full extent. Irregardless, it goes across all genders, education levels, nationalities, and immigration statuses. Traffickers also are very in touch with the youth. And so it's very different. Sometimes people think that it's a stranger. More often than not, it's family members, recruiters, employers, or strangers that support and participate in human trafficking to exploit vulnerabilities within people. And these crimes are committed through schemes, and we see that online as well. It's also important to understand that victims of sex trafficking more likely face transnational human trafficking, and we see that greatly, especially with young people being trafficked or exploited online. And again, one of the common misconceptions is that sex traffickers only exploit women, and we know very much so that's not the case. The reality is that men and boys can be victims of sex trafficking, and in some populations, that is the preferred resource of choice. Next slide, please. And so we look in respect to how trafficking breaks down, really understanding that it's the action, right? The means of recruitment, which provides a means to transport or provides or attains or attempts a particular action against a vulnerable entity. That entity is actually either by force or fraud or coercion can be used for the purpose of commercial sex acts and labor services. Next slide, please. And why is the trade of people profitable? Well, among anything, we ask the youth within our program often this question: what do they think is the most profitable aspect in terms of human trafficking or any type of crime in general? And we often get the response of drugs and other things, but really people are the most profitable aspect, and this has been consistent through time. They're a renewable resource, so if you have one, there's plenty of people to go around. This is especially true for young children, and especially online, and they can be repeatedly sold. The internet has made it very accessible for this type of nefarious activity, and just as it enables us to enjoy all of the positive aspects that it affords, it has become a means to provide efficiency for a lot of nefarious acts. Next slide, please. And so where does it happen online? It happens pretty much on anything that deals with supporting communication. And so social media, online job postings, gaming platforms, messaging boards, friends, neighbors, and relatives. This is a rather dated in terms of stats, but it remains pretty consistent. You'll see here, this source is about 5 or 6 years old. But it states that teens who use Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, etc. We actually have found that the older generation tends to use Facebook, while the younger generation is very much adept on Instagram and Snapchat. There, of course, are quite a few other apps as well and platforms, but we see a lot of activity on Instagram and Snapchat, as well as communications at a lesser extent on Twitter. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about online child sexual exploitation and grooming. And we asked the question, what exactly is online child sexual exploitation? Otherwise, we call OCSE. Understanding that this really consists of online child sexual abuse material. Sometimes this crime incorrectly is preferred or referred as child pornography, which we know that is not the appropriate term. Billions of examples of explicit material of children currently exist online, and it's not really hard to find it. In fact, we often talk to young people to try to get them to understand the difference between sexually explicit and nudity. We found that they really have a very narrow margin in terms of how they view that. And so it's not very hard to see sexually explicit material in chat forms and just normal communications on the internet. Another aspect of OCSE is grooming of children for sexual purposes. And the grooming is really developing relationships with vulnerable children with the intent to enable sexual abuse, exploit them online or offline. And this is something that is consistently seen in social media, messaging, live streaming, and has actually caused a dramatic increase in crime reports. Speaking of live streaming is another aspect of OCSE, and this is leveraged using online video apps to view and or interact with sexual abuse of children live. Some countries, probably most notably the Philippines, have become hubs for live streaming of sexual abuse of children. It's not just the Philippines. We've noted this in a variety of geographical locations where we have a grassroots presence. For example, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Brazil, there is a extreme abuse of children in live streaming within these regions, especially facilitated by the use of hospitality and tourism industry, right? And so we're finding that people are, developing and researching their vacations. In the process, they also are looking for additional value add to their vacations and travel. And this often involves interactions and engagement of young people for sexual purposes once they arrive within these destinations. And also sextortion. This is extremely important. This is also something that appears to be very rampant. We have noticed that sextortion is also occurring from children to children. And so it's not necessarily just adults to children, but children are also establishing sextortion with others, which is very troubling to see. But it involves producing and utilizing these sexual images for financial gain or personal gains. And sometimes this child abuse material is self-produced through victim manipulation. Next slide. The effects of OCSE on youth is extremely traumatic, but it has variable degrees of impact. And what we've noted is there's long-term emotional and physical symptoms. So this isn't a one-time effect that occurs in a moment in time. What we find is that Young people that have been exploited online tend to have a repetitive type of exposure. Again, the means of communication is there, and it's very hard to try to provide protective mechanisms, which is one of the reasons why we focus on providing the youth the resources and tools so they can help themselves. There's traumatic sexualization involved, lack of trust, a sense of powerlessness, as well as distress, shame, guilt, and anger. Next slide, please. And where is it happening? Well, this map right here is on one of our partners, Polaris's website. As you can see, this shows the U.S. It's happening everywhere, internationally, within rural communities, pretty much wherever there's human presence. There is no area that's immune to this type of activity. Next slide. And who are the victims? So the victims can be men, women, as I stated before, boys or girls, citizens or foreign nationals. It can involve school-aged children, particularly those made vulnerable by unstable family situations or who have little or no social support. We find this particular, the second bullet, is something that's prevalent no matter where young people reside within the world. Education is extremely important globally for our youth, and many of the children within the demographic that we serve are not afforded the opportunity to have the same education. But that is something that is a goal across the board. Unfortunately, based on a number of factors, whether social factors, geographical factors, etc., these children are not afforded the same opportunities, and they become very susceptible to human trafficking in general, like labor trafficking. But we have noticed an influx in terms of children being exploited sexually, especially when it comes to being exploited online. We've noticed also during COVID, there's higher cases because young people are isolated. And again, if you noted in the previous slides, we talked about who are the individuals that tend to have access to children, and they tend to be people that the children are familiar with, whether it's their neighbors in their community or within their home. So this is very troubling for us, and we've really pushed forth our efforts this year to make sure that we provide as much as awareness and resources and tools as we can. Children at risk are not just high school students. The average child trafficked into the commercial trade, sex trade, is between 11 and 14 years old on average. Next slide. And so how does it happen? So I talked about earlier, about Facebook and Instagram, but we noticed that gaming chat rooms are very popular. So many of these chat rooms are hosted in private chat rooms, and players can talk about, game and strategy. However, we see a lot of hijacking of users' accounts, and we also see people posing as children themselves when in fact they may be adults, and engaging in having and forming relationships within gaming chat rooms. Pop-up ads or scam alerts, children are very curious, and they tend to click on many sites thinking they're safe, and a pop-up will appear, and they'll click on it even without thinking, allowing someone to access their computer. And then the location service. This is something I'm not sure a lot of people think about when children are on their cell phones or any type of mobile device, but many of the apps that they use on their devices require the location service to be turned on. Well, when it's turned on, the app can accurately provide the location of them within a few meters. So it's important for us to understand the apps that we use, and children most definitely, we provide a lot of education to them to make sure that they understand and use this type of social platforms appropriately. Next slide. How to access the internet of the main devices. As you can see here, there's a variety of those they access, and that can computers and tablets, etc. But cell phones or mobile in general to be primary. 81% of youth actually go from a mobile device. Next slide. And so what exactly are our youth doing online? Well, they're doing what we do as adults. They're communicating through social media, they're texting consistently. That's primary forms of communication, even more verbal. They're instant messaging, music downloading, pictures, which is constant. You reflected on popular apps like Snapchat and Instagram. We are a culture now of self, and so that's something that is a constant means of a form of communication and expression. Create videos. We see that with TikTok and other platforms. And they create music. Another aspect is the gaming, as I stated earlier, and visiting virtual worlds for role playing and etc. Next slide. So the behavior statistics for youth is rather interesting. For internet, we have about 23% of children that have experienced some sort of unwanted exposure to pornographic or sexually explicit rather material. We have about 75% of teens who have an online profile on a social networking site. We had a youth meeting yesterday, and the youth were developing questions for adults. And one of the questions they asked is, are you aware of how your child's online profile? And we were having a conversation and I was explaining to the young people that how, does their parents or adults think that they have one or two social profiles, online profiles, and are they aware of their profiles? And we have very transparent conversations in Puck, and lo and behold, yes, the parents have the online profiles, and they've provided that to their parents. However, they have many others named, and so teens tend to switch and change their online profiles quite often, and more often than not, they may provide one or two or maybe even three, but they have many others. 66% of young internet users are harassed primarily through social media sites and app. This is very concerning because, again, this is a means of communication. And so we're right now researching the mental and behavioral health aspects associated with this type of harassment. Common forms, of course, is cyberbullying, but we've also seen a great increase in teen suicide over the past 10 years, actually. That's very troubling, especially here in the US. 1 in 5 teens, as teens do, very curious, especially when it comes to their sexuality and gender identity and understanding themselves. And that's a normal behavior. However, 1 in 5 teens have engaged in sexting in some form or fashion. And 44% of teen girls or boys state that they've sent sexually aggressive or, suggestive messages or images in response to the same type of content. 75% of victims who actually go out and have met offenders face to face did so more than once. This is something that we focus very much on in regards to when we're talking to young people, is the line that is crossed between online communication and agreeing to meet someone in person. This is very troubling. More often than not, within the grooming process, when young people are communicating with another entity and they develop a relationship online, that goal is to eventually meet that person in person. And we found in various degrees, depending on how susceptible that young person is, based on their circumstances, whether it's in the home, within their community, etc. That window varies greatly, but it seems to be very short. And a lot of them have met up with folks that are online in person. And 66% of parents, of course, feel that their teens spend too much time on their mobile devices. However, the teens agree with their parents' assessments and they spend too much time. However, a lot of the young people can't live without their cell phones or being online, they feel. And most of them, like I said, majority of their conversations and communications in the world are being enabled through technology. Next slide. So some of the examples of social media posts that draw attention, and unfortunately there's an image behind here, but it's not showing. We've noticed with young people, some of the things that are actually used if a trafficker is trying to draw a young person's attention. They normally target the very vulnerabilities that young people express online. In the past, before the advent of technology, for a lot of young folks, journaling or diary was where they kept their most inner secrets and deepest thoughts. Blogging and chat rooms are now have replaced that, right? And it's not just within a static document or book. Now they have an opportunity to engage with others who have a listening ear. And what we find is that offenders really focus on and target that fear. For example, a young person might feels like nobody understands them. They may feel disheartened by their appearance. They may feel distrust or disappointment in the relationships with friends. Something that's very, very common and is probably something parents don't think about is that people feel sometimes that their parents don't trust them, right? And so they seek another avenue in terms of forming that trusting relationship. And a trafficker's response almost always is, they understand that person. They are the only person that truly can relate to them. They'll make their life better, and they will protect them. And this is something that is very consistent that we see within the grooming process as well. Next slide. So speaking of grooming, really understanding what is that and what does that mean? In grooming, the overall purpose is really to manipulate, abuse, or exploit someone online. In this case of what we're referring to. The grooming stages include targeting the victim and gaining the victim's trust. And of course, as I stated before, very much focused on filling a need, right? And so more often than not, especially within the demographics that we serve, there are just so many areas of vulnerabilities and risk involved. And the needs to be filled, and grooming focus directly on doing just that. Grooming also focuses on isolation and isolating that individual. So typically, young people tend to have, as they form relationships, they may even become withdrawn and away from family and friends as they engage online with a perpetrator who is actually grooming them. It's something that doesn't necessarily occur overnight. Grooming can take a few weeks. It can take years actually. But remember, it's the human factor and the mental aspects of this, right? It's very much rooted in psychology, and that relationship to fill a void is very strong, and online is magnified even more. And so a groomer can actually target an individual, especially a young child, and really focus on making sure that they maintain that control over them. And then that control over them often involves the sexualizing of the relationship. Next slide. Something common that we see often with young people and as well as with individuals that are perpetrators are the use of emojis. And so we understand that young people are online constantly in terms of communication, and they don't necessarily use the normal language online. And so emojis help, level the playing field per se. So if a young child is being approached in a sexualized manner, emojis help to make it playful, right? It promotes trust. It kind of removes the awkwardness involved with it. It normally involves some type of humor or perceived humor. It's easily deployed. So this is something, again, that's used consistently in messaging and chat sites. Sexual offenders are very adept at using this language, and they use emojis and maintain conversations with children on a regular this way. It's also important to note that when emojis are used, they're not easily identified in automated searches. So this helps contribute greatly towards evading surveillance and online monitoring. Also, it's very easy to interpret what the emojis mean. So the meaning of these messages may often be unambiguous, and the emoji merely amplifies the intent of what the individual was trying to say. And victims often send photos of themselves, explicit photos, and solicit sexual intercourse with sexual offenders via using these emojis. And they often take steps to arrange to actually meet. So as I stated earlier, really the end all goal is to meet up or have access to young people as well. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about OCSE and grooming, and we'll go and talk a little bit more about what exactly are the programs and services that we offer. So Protect Kids Foundation has a pipeline program and rehabilitation for behavioral mental health internships and sexual advocacy and program. As we're doing of what we do, and so we do webinars such as these, as well as workshops and awareness possible about this. Of course, do fundraising events, focus on youth volunteers to really drive awareness on sex trafficking and other issues but relevant to their communities. We focus on this strategic partnership, and probably the most impactful focus of Protect Us Kids and really is the heart of our youth, and we absolutely adore them. Are so amazing and talented. Yes, really of a struggle. You would think that young people have the means of they should have a voice. And young people really words in terms of using their communication skills, and so we focus within as kids to really provide a communication with themselves. We want them to be able to talk about anything, and want them to be comfortable and understand some of the social experience, and often that they have a program in a safe place to discuss that. So advocacy and outreach, we have aspects. So now in support of this program is a virtual role. And so this is under development. We're working with partners, actually looking for other partners to help us. The idea we safe havens as domestic violence shelters and physical havens for the business. But what we do is in respect young people that are impacted by and or online they don't have a haven to. They spend so much time online, we just create for them. And so the portal we call it currently the goal of this portal is let's that's engaging nations or they are in some with physically in person, whether it's harassment, bullying, there's a myriad of other reasons. Online, there's a situation where they have a situation, and so they actually go and to detect it, and with that in the geographical location in the U.S. and they can receive online time professionals within mental health. They may be able to as well. So we want to make sure that this avenue to be able to have Another ambassador program, young people taking responsibility and towards providing awareness. Between 3 and 10 years. Very proud of them. Our Puck Academy actually a series. It's a 3-part episode. And then one of the things I believe it's in September, focused on things online enticement. I encourage you to go and view this episode. It's enlightening, and our young people within this age just provided the job of making sure that people understood what the things are, experience, so that activities that are. I also have something interesting in terms of cyber development. One of the ideas behind this, individuals are impacted by on-child sexual exploitation and commercial sex. They going through the process of rehabilitated. Some of them, and we've been to actually be impacted in this form of use as well. Means to fight is a very many of them are excellent in cybersecurity space. They don't realize that they actually can have a life in job opportunities with cyber. And for some of them, I never really thought about it because and they don't really and skill sets that they actually have in them. More other partnerships in terms of training and capacity, and really focus on there's a pipeline. The young people are life as well as those that are coming through partnerships have access to opportunities where they have career in cyber. And again, our action with the centered approach on the of 16.2. Next. Again, our youth life program is peer-to-peer model. It focuses on equipping them with the skills and the resources and tools to help themselves. We encourage the youth appreciation of others and promote positive and ethical cross-cultural online relationships. This is important. There's not necessarily the internet police to keep young people, within the proper use of the internet. And so you see a lot of forms of enhanced behavioral abuse online because there's this perceived sense of others not knowing who you are. And so for some reason, young people and adults as included tend to express a lot of negative behavior online. And the effects of that on others is really, really impactful. And so it's important for us to teach young people how to conduct themselves online and to talk about, how to handle when they are receiving harassment or sexual advances online as well. Another aspect of this is really to focus on youth leadership and support of global social issues. And we do that through the various technology platforms that we offer. And our young people are, again, at the core of providing awareness and advocating against online child sexual exploitation. We're very proud of them. Next slide. And so here's an example. This is a snippet from our Teen Talk series. And this is some of our amazing youth that are within our 15 to 17 year old cohort. This actually is one of our social media posts promoting the Teen Talk series. And again, it was focused on sextortion. Some of the questions that were posed in there were a series of them, but how can you tell someone it's a predator? What would you do if someone threatened to post a sexual picture of you without consent? And does posting sexual images actually get you more followers? Our young people, the names that you see actually are stage names. They are not their real names, but the representatives that we have here are Faith, Hope, and Truth. Those are the names that they chose, and we have actually some additional volunteers that were interested in also participating in future videos as well. So please be on the lookout and support our young people. They are amazing, and I learned a lot from them. Their world is very different than when I was their age, and they are faced with so much in respect to making very adult situations, and it's very challenging for them because their brains are not developed to handle that. But they're very smart once they've received the resources and tools towards navigating that space. And so, as long as they have our support and positive reinforcement and very transparent communication and very trusting relationships, they have done very, very well, and they will continue to do so. Next slide, please. So our core programs, I talked about this a little bit before, but again, some of this is academic outreach, training, and development, similar to what we're doing now, but really focus on providing that awareness globally within the community, and also empowering our youth within these marginalized populations to succeed through this education and awareness. And again, providing them resources and tools to help themselves. Next slide. Identity and data programs is really focused on partnerships and grants. And this is targeted ideally within our law enforcement community. And so we leverage these partnerships towards understanding and developing data discovery practices with our partners to find at-risk youth to target for our programs. It also supports that enhanced coordination among various governmental agencies globally as well that are responsible for investigations and prosecution of OCSC offenses. We also have our research, intelligence, and analysis subcomponent of this program, which again really focuses on developing and creating and obtaining relevant statistics and facts and stories of human trafficking, specifically in respect to online child sexual exploitation and online commercial sex trafficking globally. And also working with our law enforcement and government partners, and it's towards generating reports and stats as well. Next slide. Other programs, of course, involves health affairs, which again involves mental and behavioral health entities. Our health affairs program has a primary health affairs liaison for all of our partnership activities. Again, we understand that this particular aspect of human trafficking is really a human issue, and cyber in general is a human issue, right? And it's about protecting our civil liberties and protecting the things that are most valuable to us, and for us, it's our young people. Next slide. And in support of the health affairs, we have our sexual assault advocacy and outreach, and this really serves to provide crisis intervention to young people that have become victims of OCSE or sexual assault and abuse due to OCSE or online commercial sex trafficking. It aligns with our overall mission, and we focus very much on not just the awareness aspect and prevention, but also the rehabilitation. So we want to help survivors of this type of abuse attain a place in their lives where their confidence and safety is restored, and to minimize any aspects of potential teen suicide or extreme bouts of depression and mental illness based on the nefarious acts that are conducted online against them. Next slide. Our public relations and communications is really the core of what we do as well. Of course, with COVID, we are very much fully virtual online. And so we focus very strongly on targeted global messaging and campaigns tailored to the communities of youth that reside within these marginalized populations. It's very important for us to make sure that messaging is consistent and culturally sensitive, depending on the regions that we serve. We also, again, provide that global media education and promote our social media program through our public relations program as well. Next slide. Our technology innovation is a lifeblood of our organization. The technology innovation program focuses on data science and a data analytics platform in support of data collection efforts. And the goal is to achieve reliable disaggregated estimates of the number of online commercial child sexual exploitation victims, especially within the demographic that we serve. We work with very closely international and regional entities through the exchange of information related to this type of activity, and as well as developing action plans and understanding the methods of exploitation. And again, as mentioned before, our technology program supports and provides the platform for our virtual safe haven for our youth. Next slide. So we have a few resources available for you. Next slide. And one of these, of course, you can go out on our website and we can provide this to you as well. But there's a Global Youth Bill of Rights that is established by one of our partners, ECPAC. ECPAC focuses on sexual exploitation of children globally. We have a variety of means. Our focus, of course, is online or leveraged via technology. But this Bill of Rights is something that we use when we provide awareness to our youth populations, and it really provides a very simplified message. And you'll see the icons here as well as to what it means if they're touched or asked to touch them in a way. What does that mean? Talk, text, or message in a sexual way, force, threaten, or manipulated into having sex or performing a sex act, forced to marry someone. We have a large prevalence, especially in other regions of the world, in respect to child brides, forced to move away from your home for sex, or photographed or filmed having sex, or nude, or asked to be watched having sex. And these are things that are very concrete, and we leverage the Global Youth Bill of Rights as our main platform for our Youth Life program as well. Next slide. And here's specific rights for child victims of sexual exploitation and abuse. Again, there are 10 specific rights, everything from that they have a right to be protected, all the way down to having the right to have free medical and social services to help them cope. That's one of the services that we provide through PUC, through our partnerships. And if you need to know a little bit more detail about this, this particular site is a direct reference from ECPAC, which is one of our partners. And you can find this online, or we can provide this to you as a reference as well. Next slide. Here, just behavioral youth indicators. So understanding some of the emotional, social changes that young people go through various parts of their life. So, teens and young teens in particular, how they think and they learn. This helps us to tailor our curriculum greatly. We ask these questions of ourselves when we're providing resources and tools, but we also ask these questions of our young people in order to be able to engage with them and to understand the various situations that they encounter. Next slide. And this goes all the way from middle childhood all the way down to preschoolers, as a matter of fact. And so this is a helpful guide towards if you're trying to develop some type of conversations with your children, or you have some preliminary academic resources that you want to develop, or if you just want to volunteer with Protect Us Kids. We use this with our volunteers as well, again, to help them understand and to normalize the situation when it comes to children's behavior and what's the best approach to talk with them and identify potential issues that they may be experiencing online as well. Next slide. And so that is the end of our presentation. Again, you can reach us on all of our social media, our website, of course. We have Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. I sincerely appreciate those who have stayed with us during this last hour. It was a very great opportunity to provide you with a little bit more understanding of what we do. And if you're interested in volunteering, please do go on our site or on Volunteer Match as well, and we'll be more than happy to talk with you and understand your interests. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand it back off to Danietta.
Thank you so much. It was so much information. My goodness, I'm sitting here like I've got 15 questions, but we don't have that much time. So I am going to turn it over to if there's any questions from the audience, anything that you would like to ask Ms. Woods. I do have one question I want to ask in case while we're waiting to see if we want to add something to the chat. Um, one thing that you mentioned was about the increase in teen suicide. And I'm just curious about how that's being affected right now with COVID, when even the few social engagements that they would normally have, our young people would have, being able to go to the playground or being able to go out to the movies, all that is really taken away from them. So they're really turning more than ever to social media to get the connections. And if you're seeing um, a rise, and what are some of the things that as caregivers, law enforcement, cybersecurity professionals, we can do to help protect young people during this very unique time?
Yes, some of the teen suicide bit is something that is a key focus for our youth within our youth life program right now. It's really the understanding of the mental health impact with the advent of technology. And what we've focused on right now is to really identify sources. And so we don't necessarily see the sources that identify those teen suicides that were facilitated by the use of technology. And that's one of our scopes of research that we're focused on right now. We do see teen suicide. Actually, the latest stats were just released a couple of weeks ago. We see it overall and based, especially here within the U.S., within the various states over a 10-year period of time. We really are focused on trying to understand the increase, right? I'll give you an example. One of the ask of the young folks was to look at the stats that were provided and to what was common as something that stood out to them. And what really stood out to them is that the highest rates appeared to be within rural, underserved, and marginalized communities within states that perhaps had a larger population of that demographic. But actually, the most common or the most prevalent increase that was really kind of shocking to see within the state of New Hampshire. And right now, the young people are in the process of researching, like, what does that mean? And what are some of the underlying factors, right? Because nothing is done in isolation. And so there's numerous reasons as to why this is happening. For COVID in particular, it's a little early still to understand. I think we'll have a little bit more data as we continuously progress. We have, however, understood the increase of abuse. And it's very troubling, especially for our mental and behavioral health and social services community, because they can't get access to the young people, right? Because they're isolated. And so because they know their backgrounds and they understand where they're at, there is very much concern of increased states of depression and abuse. And self-harm, right? And one of the focuses is for us to really make sure that we maintain that engagement and support system. And that's what our young people are doing. That peer-to-peer model appears to be one of the most effective methods towards deterring teen suicide. It's having a support system. And for many of them, they don't have one, even though it's perceived as if they have thousands of followers. They don't have a support system, and that's what they seek. And so focused on the human factor, focusing on relationships, focus on reaching out to people and noticing behavior, right? Even if it's virtually, is important, and being able to notify the appropriate authorities to help with that is important as well. So it's something that we are very much focused on. And over time, I'm thinking we will have a little bit more information as to, how and why this is occurring and this increase, especially with online activity.
Okay, well, I know I have a few more, but I'm going to hold those. We're going to announce that you can join us again on the 28th of October from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. PUC, Protect Us Kids, will be hosting a full training, so you'll be able to do a lot more deep dive with the team at PUC. And the title of this is The Dark Web and Its Influence on Our Youth. So we look forward to seeing you there. There's no other questions, again, we thank you so much, Ms. Woods, for joining us this early morning and sharing with us all the great work you and the team are doing at Protect Us Kids. And we look forward to hearing more on the 28th of October, 6 to 8 p.m. And you can join us online. You can go to the Covenant LinkedIn page or Facebook page, and we have the Protect Us Kids flyer there to be able to register. Okay, thank you so much, and everyone have a wonderful day. Bye.